I love that picture. There's love in that picture. So 2014 was a very significant year for Russia. Lots of changes. The annexation of Ukraine, the Crimean Peninsula within Ukraine, I've already mentioned, and the sanctions that followed. The sanctions had an effect, a big effect on the Russian economy, and there's been a dramatic deterioration in relations between Russia and the West since. Possibly, strangely, repaired somewhat because of the need of the Western powers to talk to Russia over Syria. But as a result, Russia was forced to look east for new friends, and they found a new friend with China. Recently, China has signed 2 enormous gas deals with Russia. The one deal signed first was called the Power of Siberia to supply 38 billion, I'm sorry, it's not cubic centimeters, it's cubic meters. There's an extra C in there that should have been corrected. For 30 years, probably commencing around 2018. And another major gas pipeline, the Atlai line, which will supply northwest China. The deals came at quite a crucial time for for Russia. Just want to say a few words about the area, the geographic area that we have most of our interest in, because within Russia, the government is putting emphasis on certain areas for development. And one of these is Yamal, which is this area in green highlighted here. So Yamal is a springboard, if you like, a bridge to the Arctic and further development. It's an area where already 50%, in that small area I've just put up on the board, 50% of Russia's proven gas reserves exist already. And believe it or not, it's still an area where resources remain largely undeveloped. There's enormous opportunities for infrastructural development. Our own interest at Nekton, we bought into a company called Rise Capital, which owns a very large petrochemical project in Yamal. We aim to build a polyethylene plant producing 1 million metric tons of polyethylene per year. That feed will be gas. It's ethane-rich gas and a pure stream of ethane as well. I mentioned some of the other crude fields there for you to have a look at. In terms of infrastructural development, since 2013, the government has spent 47 billion rubles on building a canal across the Ob Bay, and that will promote the development of Sabeta Port, which is the main port hub in that region. It'll allow terminals to be built and foster the development of the next slide, which is the Sabeta development from Novatek. So last week I already mentioned that the Chinese government fund, the Silk Road Fund, had finalized their purchase of 10% of the LNG project. And the split on ownership there is now Novatek 50%, Total 20%, CNPC, the Chinese company, 20%, and now China Silk Road 9%. So this is one of the big projects in the region. We expect about 16.5 million tons of LNG per annum to be exported from that plant, commencing probably 2017. There's already one new railway being built in the region, and it's also the Yamal area is an area for big development from Gazprom, their Yamal mega project. So it's an area where there's an awful lot of stuff happening, and it's an area where I think we all need to be involved as well. Lastly, I want to just push this slide up because the Russians have an ambition to utilize that north shore of Russia, the Arctic coast, as a transport route to the Far East. They refer to it as the Northern Sea Route. And last year, I think it was, Novatek sent quite a large tanker, 120,000 ton deadweight tanker, all the way around to China, Ningbo. And the journey was 22 days, which is less than half the normal time for the same route via the Suez Canal. So it's not an easy route because it does remain iced up for most of the year, but with more passage, more use, the icebreakers need to work less hard to keep the passage open. And with convoys, we should see a lot more of that. The navigation season extended as well. Just in 2015, I think the volume on that route, which is not great anyway, did diminish. So I'm not pretending it's up and running and entirely workable at this stage. My own conclusions, not necessarily yours, not necessarily my company's conclusions. I think that we just go through these quickly. Any rise in the oil and gas price will be a great stimulus to the Russian economy, but possibly is not essential. So with Brent crude oil, $41 or whatever it is today, a very welcome step in the right direction. We probably see a new dynamism from Russia towards the east, especially towards China and Japan, and less reliance on Europe. But don't pretend for one moment that Russia will not remain reliant on Europe, at least for the next 10 years and probably beyond. They're interwoven. Concerns about various East European countries' ability to pay their gas bills, not just Ukraine, but a lot of the East European countries appear to have a solvency problem at the present moment. Increased exports of natural gas, including LNG, we're likely to see that in the future. New LNG plants which are being built, one probably not to be built, which is the Vladivostok plant, but the others probably all going on, Sakhalin 1, Sakhalin 2, Yamal. We'll see exports of LNG, obviously, LPG, condensate and ethane increasing. Continued interest in acquiring overseas assets. Quite difficult with the ruble being at 68 to the dollar, but nonetheless, the companies that are investing have deep pockets and do have reserves. The more ruble to the dollar does stimulate inward investment. If you're earning dollars through sales of oil, it gives you more rubles to invest locally, and that will result in various things, not least development of local skills. More spending on improvement of transport efficiency, ports, pipes, roads, rail. Refinery upgrades, lower sulfur levels in the transportation fuels, less fuel oil being produced. The Russians are embarked already on a very large refinery upgrading program. Typically, Russian refineries we measure the complexity of a refinery on something called the Nelson Index. A low number is not a very complex refinery. A high number is a more complex refinery. And it talks about the amount of value-added goodies a refinery can make from the crude oil that they refine. But Russia typically has an average of around 5, the EU around 6.5, and the US 9.6. So with this latest round of upgrading, Russia probably will achieve 6.5 as an average for the Nelson Index, and it will result in less fuel oil exports and more diesel exports. We'll see progress on new development hubs, such as the Yamal project, which I've mentioned already. A greater willingness to allow foreign investment in Russia, either by purchasing shares in companies or by public-private partnerships. And that will result in overseas companies being able to own, operate, run, set their own tariffs for at least a 20-year period before the asset will revert back to state ownership or progressively revert back to state ownership. We'll see more new coal-fired power stations and nuclear power stations. Russia exports a lot of coal to China, but that is being reduced as China reduces its coal burn. And the idea now is that Russia will probably build coal-fired power stations and export the power instead. And then we'll see continuing interest in developing the Arctic and the North, and possibly the use of that North Sea route that I mentioned. I haven't put in here things like the breakup of Gazprom, which are also mooted, they're being discussed, unbundling transportation of gas from the selling of gas from the production of gas. We'll have to wait and see what happens on that. That side, I hope, says it all. We see a man stranded on an island thinking he's being rescued by a boat. We see a man who's stranded in his boat, thinks he's found land, and going to be saved. I think everything depends on your own perspective. And just before I came in here, I showed that slide to Casper, who's sitting down here, and he said, "You should say, Peter, that there is value in stranded assets after all." So thank you very much for your patience and your time.
One comment I'd make about that is, just following on from one thing Peter said, is this: if you want to see the relationship of interdependence of energy with Europe, recall that even at the very heights of the Cold War, the Soviet Union never turned off its energy supplies. Moritz Inepis is our next speaker.